Until this century, our output matched our input. We had to be active because there were no cars to transport us, supermarkets to provide us with packaged foods, and gadgets to do our household chores, and stores of every variety to provide for our every need. In the world in which we evolved, it made sense to hoard rest time. Today, we may spend the day sitting in an office chair and then sitting in the car and then finally spending the night on the couch watching television, all the while trying to enforce ourselves to get onto the treadmill or to the health club. Why we became so obese is not mysterious. We have plentiful food, bodies not equipped with sufficient breaks for fats and sweets, and we have arranged a world so that we need less and less physical exertion to survive. We are forced to do the unnatural, refuse food, and engage in purposeful activity for the sake of burning it off and keeping our bodies tuned up. And that is important because there is actually a biological reason why there is a mental block of people purposely exercising. Biologically, our bodies are programmed to conserve. So, our ancestors who were having to do a lot of physical labor to survive, once they were done with that labor, their bodies told them to shut down because they needed to conserve. And we now have the opposite problem. What took centuries to develop in other cultures happened quickly in islands like the Tongan cluster and the South Pacific. In 1986, a survey found that 2/3 of Tongan women in their 40s were obese, diabetic, had hypertension, that's high blood pressure, and heart disease, where the epidemic and life expectancy had decreased. One thing that is important to realize is that the Tongan people, food is a central part of their culture, and they tend to be larger and would be clinically obese according to U.S. standards. However, on a traditional diet, they are healthy, do not have the presence of these diseases, and they are moving, they're working in the fields all day, so they're exerting a lot of amount of physical labor. So this is the difference in the change in lifestyle and dietary, non-traditional diets that are centered around processed foods. So rapid changes in lifestyle have caused an epidemic of obesity, and this is obesity related to unhealthy lifestyle, which is different than measures of obesity based on traditional diets and traditional movement, which is not necessarily an indicator of bad health. Cars were introduced and foods were imported for people who had eaten yams, manioc, and fish that they either planted or caught. Without knowledge of health disadvantages or aesthetics of thinness to rein in the appetite, many happy Tongans were eating whole loaves of bread spread with half a pound of butter and ice cream. So this is taking the tradition of a people that was healthy and there was a purpose for it, and adding in the unhealthy component of a westernized diet, and then basically destroying the health of a whole people because they're eating foods that their bodies evolutionarily are not built to digest. And we see this in a lot of native cultures with high rates of diabetes, that actually their bodies are evolutionarily designed to be slow metabolizers as far as they metabolize sugar much slower because of the traditional diets that were low in sugar, so that their bodies were conserving. So when you add sugar to a lot of these native cultures, you see the rate of diabetes skyrocket, and it's related to the processed food that are introduced into the diet. So mutton flaps were too fat and greasy to be considered edible by New Zealanders, were shipped over, and they became favorite fried, a daily staple. The World Health Organization needed to convince the leader, King Tafahuaho, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, Tapu IV, of the importance of weight loss, and really I would say the importance of a healthy lifestyle instead of weight loss. Like many leaders, the king was a big man. He was 6'2" and weighed 441 pounds. And in 1976, he had been listed as the world's heaviest ruler, and this culture had a value on the large size. Convinced that he needed to restore the reputation of Tongans as strong athletes and not fatness, the king slimmed down and held his gym sessions videotaped for the masses. They now join many Westerners in dieting and yet remain overweight. It is said that non-Western cultures have a beauty ideal of fatness, and this is important because ancient fertility goddesses such as Venus of Willendorf show massive breast, hips, and torsos, which studies showing women who go into fertility clinics who have more of a hour-shaped body shape, meaning that they have larger torsos and hips and smaller waist, actually have a higher success rate of becoming pregnant and better outcomes in pregnancy. And so this body shape is favored evolutionarily, unlike the super thin model ideal that we have here. Among the Anyan of southeastern Nigeria and other West African countries, girls are housed in special fattening rooms where they are secluded and fed to make them plumper in preparation for mating or marriage. This is actually changing among the younger generation as they are being exposed to Western culture, and we're seeing eating disorders pop up in some of these countries. There's also the AIDS factor in a lot of African countries, that women who are very thin are associated with having AIDS and being untouchable, basically. So this is a protective barrier for eating disorders, but we are starting to see this change. Extra body fat helps bring on menstruation and fertility and increase the chances of a healthy baby. Heavier mothers produce heavier babies who grow and develop faster. And the weight gives the girl and the family social status because it demonstrates that the family could afford to siphon off resources to make their daughter plump and fertile. However, a few girls can afford to stay in long enough to get fat, and whatever fat they do accumulate is transient because they are physically involved in manual labor. Evolution would have left us with beauty detectors attuned to the normal or average body, which is lean but not super thin. And this is in fact what most studies find, that normal or average weight is usually preferred to very slim or heavy. Devendra Singh finds that this in 18 cultures that he has tested as a psychiatrist, and Becker found that even in Fiji, other South Pacific islands with extremely high prevalence of overweight and obese people. Unlike in the United States, however, 2/3 of both males and females who are overweight or obese do not show an overwhelmingly desire to lose weight, nor do they torture themselves over a slim ideal. Over 50% of obese females she interviewed and more than 70% of the overweight females wanted to maintain their current weight. But shown line drawings of 13 figures ranging from very thin to very obese, and asking to pick the most attractive, the Fijians selected figures in the mid-range. And very similar figures have been shown to people in Britain, Uganda, and Kenya by psychologist Adrian Burnham and his colleagues. We're striking across culture consistency in which figures were found most attractive. None rated the extremely fat or thin as attractive, and all picked the same cluster of mid-weight figures for both male and female drawings. So the average weight is found to be most attractive across cultural. And Becker found that within Fiji, the ratings were consistent across both sexes, and no matter how close or how far the village was from an urban center. That is what would cause certain societies to have an ideal weight that is far lower than the average. The Darwinian forces are multiple and sometimes contradictory. Feeding yourself is one and attracting mates is another. And mate attraction motive is tied to both health and to status. I will stop right there. She goes into skeletal bodies and why they may be preferred. But one thing that there's another article that I have read in cultures that where vegetarianism has evolved. For example, vegetarian, in order to be able to restrict your diet, you have to have the ability to choose your diet. And in cultures where food is not abundant, you don't have that ability. And so when food becomes abundant and becomes available to the masses, then that's when you start seeing the appearance of specialized diets like vegetarianism or restrictive diets. And so there's a status, it's like a backward status quo. So hopefully you'll find this helpful, but what I'd like you to get out of this is that the thin ideal is not biologically healthy, nor is it preferred across the world, and so we have to be aware of this and work towards change so that we can develop a healthy ideal in cultures who value the super thin ideal.